Welcome to Whack an Atheist Wednesday with Dr. Kent, the science gent. We've been looking frantically for just one functioning brain cell in somebody who claims there's no God. I think you'd have to be brainless, and that's been our observation. We can't find a single cell. They appear to be brain dead, can't detect any brain waves. So this is going to be Whack an Atheist night with real science. And tonight we're going to pick on Richard Dawkins, a famous brand name evolutionist. What is he, about 77 years old now? Whatever it is. Today is December 11th, 2019. We're the folks who believe the Bible is literally true and scientifically accurate, and the evolution theory is the dumbest and most dangerous religion in the history of the world. 887. Someone sent me the text, Brother Hovind, will you please whack Richard Dawkins next? He's destroying the faith of many people. Well, I agree. Richard, I'm sorry to have to do this to you. The Richard Dawkins Foundation for Reason and Science. Really? You want reason and science as things we can observe, study, test, and demonstrate. So he did a video on, somebody said, Richard Dawkins, show me the intermediate fossils. And he did one in Nebraska at the Nebraska Museum showing the whale evolution. And here's him standing by there. I'm going to get ready to play the video of him talking. And then Dan, you've been studying this intently. Introduce yourself quickly. Well, Steve, you can call up the video here of the Richard Dawkins.
Sure.
Okay.
My name is Dr. Dan Biddle. I'm the president of Genesis Apologetics. We are a biblical creation ministry, and Kent, a lot of your work was quite instrumental in me trusting the historicity of Genesis about 6 or 7 years ago.
Well, yeah, and where are you located and what do you do?
Yeah, we're in Sacramento, California area, and our biblical creation ministry provides training mostly to students. We speak in private schools, churches, homeschool associations, but our real heart is trying to put a lot of this stuff out on the internet. We have about 100,000 subscribers now on YouTube, and we put out a lot of content dealing with the creation evolution topics.
Okay, and what's the website they can get hold of your stuff again? Dan, how do they get a hold of your stuff? What's your website?
Yeah, sorry, Kent, I think you broke up just a little bit. Can you hear me all right now?
Yeah, I can hear you just fine. Genesis Apologetics,
Okay.
Is that the name of your website? They go to Genesis Apologetics?
Yes. Yep, they can go to Genesis Apologetics, and we have two different programs there. One is called Debunking Evolution, and it's a skit-based video program primarily designed for 5th to 10th graders. And then we have another website called The 7 Myths. You spell out the number 7, so just go to 7myths.com, and that program is for junior and seniors in high school all the way up through college. And we take a look at the 7 main myths that are taught in a lot of the more liberal-leaning Christian colleges and seminaries and all secular schools, and we address those 7. They're all from a biblical worldview perspective. All
right, now I watched the video that your ministry did on whale evolution and debunking the idiot idea that a 1,000-pound cow turned into a 300,000-pound whale.
Yeah.
By losing. It's silly.
It's incredible, Kent. I mean, and it gets even better. I mean, you can go. Some people think it goes back to a cow, a 1,000-pound cow, but actually, most theorists now would start it back to an artiodactyl that was maybe 100-pound, cloven-hoofed creature, and they say, well, it could have been a wolf-like creature, or some people say it was a bear, hippopotamus, or even an antelope. So it's definitely an imaginary creature that they link it back to, but somehow that little imaginary creature spawned off and evolved into 13 whale families, about 79 different species of whales, with, of course, the biggest one being a blue whale at 360,000 pounds. So it's quite a far-fetched theory.
All right, I'm going to play Richard Dawkins. It's only 2 minutes long, and you stop me whenever you'd like, because he's going to say, here's the evidence right here, and he's going to give these names, and the average kid in high school is going to say, oh, this is Sir Richard Dawkins. He's been knighted. He's got a doctor's degree. He teaches evolutionary biology. Wow, he must know what he's talking about. Well, there's no question he's got a high IQ, and he's very smart in some areas, but he's willingly ignorant of the creation. He's a fool on this area, and I'm going to whack him tonight. So help me out. I'm going to play the 2-minute, 30-second clip, and you tell me when to stop when you'd like to interject something. All right, Dan?
Sounds great.
All right, here he goes.
People People often say, where are the intermediate fossils? Show us your intermediate fossils. There are plenty of intermediate fossils, and one of the best examples is whales. The modern whales are up there. Here's a series of fossils back in time, Dorodon, about 36.
First of all, Mr. Dawkins, let me whack you with a little science and knowledge. These are not fossils you're pointing to. These are pictures. Amen. These are not fossils. These are imaginary creatures that you imagine. This is not science. So pay attention, son.
Million years ago, Rhodocetus about 47.5 million years, Pachycetus about 48.5 million years. And you can see they form a lovely series of intermediates.
They form a lovely series of intermediates. You drew the pictures and drew a line between them. Dan, they do this all the time, as if that's part of science.
That's a good point. I mean, we could belabor that issue. We could talk about the millions of years dating that they have and everything. It's really incredible. But there is a good stopping point coming up when he talks about how the cute little limbs and pelvis have just retracted themselves automatically and become vestigial over millions of years. I think he's just about to get to it.
All right.
As you go from old to young, Pachycetus, Rhodocetus, you're gradually losing the hind legs to Dorodon, which has almost lost the hind legs completely. Modern whales have completely lost the hind legs. There are some vestigial bones, some remnant bones buried deep inside the body.
Yeah, we can stop it right there. So that is probably some of the most embarrassing arguments that evolutionists still continue to make. And I'm going to use an analogy. So an analogy would be, we all know about the famous Lucy fossil, which is the leading supposed icon proving that humans evolved from ape-like creatures millions of years ago. And to this day, in exhibits around the world, they still have Lucy's thoracic vertebrae right below her skull, which is a little vertebrae that they now know and widely admit did not belong to Australopithecines. It belonged to a Theropithecus, an extinct baboon. But you go into museums across the world and they still proudly display her only thoracic vertebrae sitting there right underneath her head and say, look, that belongs to Lucy. But now most paleontologists know that it doesn't. And it's the same thing with the vestigial hip bones of whales. You can pick up any high school biology textbook today, and the vast majority of them will claim that whales have these vestigial claspers or hip structures that they used to have millions of years ago that they no longer need. But then the most embarrassing article came out in November 2014 in the journal called the Journal of Evolution. And they admitted in the article is titled "The Sexual Selection Targets Sibbian Pelvic Bones." You can go out and anyone can read it themselves. They have now completely redacted that position and said, you know, actually, they're not vestigial hips or pelvis structures or little legs that have tucked themselves back in over millions of years. They're mating claspers that provide the structure and mechanism for these creatures to reproduce. And if you take these claspers away, they would stop reproducing in the very next generation. So here we have Richard Dawkins that is not even reading their own journal called Evolution, which now has completely redacted that position, and they now understand these are not vestigial structures. These things have purpose and intent, and whales and dolphins could not reproduce without them.
Dan, I'm holding one in my hand that I got when I was up in Alaska, where whales wash up on the beach from time to time. This is part of the male reproductive system. I don't want to be too far off base here on public TV, but the male's penis is 15 feet long. They have to mate in the dark, underwater, with no arms, and they can't talk and say, scoot over, honey. This has nothing whatsoever to do with walking on land. This has to do with making baby whales. Like you said, it has purpose and function, had blood supply, nerve supply. This is part of their reproductive system. And for Richard Dawkins to say, this is proof that it used to have hind legs, Richard, you need to get whacked. It is not a hind leg. And going from having legs to not having legs would be losing something, not gaining something. And to go from a tail like a cow or a dog would have, a whip-like tail, which goes side to side generally, to a whale fluke, which goes up and down, This is so ludicrous to think there's any relationship. And I point out, no fossils count as evidence for evolution, none, because you can't prove that those bones had any children at all. Anyway, anything else on this, or should I keep going?
You know, I think there's just one more generic comment I want to make before we get into the specific icons that he's got there, is that there have been all kinds of evolutionists that have come out and said, you know what, we have no idea how the changes in morphology and function between artiodactyls, which is like the hippopotamus or the antelopes that these things supposedly came from, could possibly evolve into whale-like creatures. In fact, one guy, Dr. Sternberg, has said there's not even enough evolutionary time to go from some form of a land mammal into whales because of all the different changes that they have to do. In fact, our book has a list of 21 different changes that you have to do to go from a land creature to a whale. Obvious things like you have to have a fetus now in breech position, you have to nurture young underneath the water, you have to have a very novel muscle system around your blowholes, you have to develop changes to your eyes so you can even see underneath water, you have to change your ear bones, you have to decouple your esophagus from your trachea. I mean, the list goes on and on and on and on. It makes way more sense that these creatures were breathed into existence by God himself on the 5th day of creation, way more than some long, slow evolutionary process, because you've got 21 distinct changes that have to happen to go between a mammal, and a whale, and it's just straight impossible.
Well, the thing you said about disconnecting the trachea, this is something a lot of people don't realize. Whales breathe through the top of their head straight into their lungs, and they can breathe and eat at the same time, because the mouth goes into the stomach and it's not connected to their lungs or their... We have one hole, your mouth, brings in the air and the food, and then you have an epiglottis to separate the two to go into the stomach or go into the lungs. How is it going to survive the transition between that and where's the evidence? This is pure fantasy land.
That's a great point, and some of these evolutionists are throwing up their hands saying, you know what, for this to really happen, to go from mammals to whales with these 21 distinct major changes in how they live and act, you would need to have thousands and thousands of in-between examples demonstrating the evolution and progression of each of these 21 things, and they just don't have it. They're completely missing.
Even if they had a fossil that was intermediate, like I said, no fossils would count. You can't prove those bones had any children. And why can't any animals today produce other than their kind? Where's an example of one living that we can watch? I mean, farmers have watched a whole lot of critters be born. None have been different. Cows produce cows, dogs produce dogs, no exceptions.
You know, when people write up the book of Genesis as myth, I say, look, let's just start with the first chapter. It says in the first chapter, 10 times after their kind. Let them produce after their kind. And animals produced after their kind. So is there any way that God could have been more clear? He was incredibly clear. And that what he said there has stood fast over thousands of years of supposed scientific progression. So he said it once, and he was right when he said it.
And 10 more times in the flood story. Bring them onto the ark after their kind. All right, let me continue here.
Fantastic.
Richard says here, this is a lovely series of intermediates. He likes this evolution theory because it gets rid of God for now. Richard, you don't have much time. You'll be facing God one of these days. And I would be willing to predict you'll be dead for a really long time. All right, let me finish here.
A lovely series of intermediates getting progressively more and more specialized in living in the sea.
He just says it like it's a fact, getting more and more specialized at living in the sea. Do you realize just changing from drinking fresh water to drinking salt water would be a pretty major change?
That's so true.
All right, tell me when you want me to stop again here, Dan.
Okay.
If you look at Pachycetus, which is an old fossil whale, you see that the nostril is just about where you'd expect the nostril to be, near the tip of the snout. If we move on a million years...
Yeah, let's go ahead and stop there at Pachycetus. So Pakicetus is a very interesting name. Pakicetus simply just means whale from Pakistan, and it was originally found by this guy by the last name of Gingrich in 1980. He finds a few skull fragments, and he jumps up and says this is a perfect intermediate between land animals and whales. And Gingrich is one of the leading experts supposedly on whale evolution, but 10 years later, after they find the initial finding in 1980, they find a few more bones, and they completely backed out of that position and changed and said, you know what? It now looks like, and they published this in the one of evolutionists' leading journal called Nature, and said it now looks like they were no more amphibious than a tapir, and a tapir is a modern browsing animal that lives in Southern and South America. But they're now saying that these creatures, based upon the latest fossils that they found, were actually runners moving with only their digits touching the ground. That's a quote from the latest journal. And then to make it even worse, in the year 2000, 20 years after Gingrich has his initial find, he now changed his position and said, you know what, I don't think it was really Pakicetus. It was that whales are now coming from antelopes. So this all proves that the fear of God is the beginning of knowledge.
Right.
And my son, who knows nothing about Pakicetus, nothing about tapirs, but trusts God's word, knows more about whales than leading experts do, because the fear of God is the beginning of his knowledge base. So here we have 20 years of fossil findings, very, very limited, scant fossils of these things called Pakicetus. And over 20 years, they changed the position on it 2 or 3 times. So it's very, very unreliable science. The fear of God is the beginning of knowledge.
Well, again, they found a few fragments of the skull. They found some bones in the dirt. You can't prove this had any children. Certainly you can't prove it had different children. You can't prove it had children that lived. So even if it is what somebody, I would say a tricycle is halfway between a bicycle and a car. Well, because it's got 3 wheels. I mean, you could draw a line between them and say, see how the car evolved from a bike? That's stupid. Tricycles are tricycles. And how big did they guess Pakicetus was? Full grown, dressed out, what size animal was this?
I think about 100 pounds.
About 100 pounds. And what's a blue whale weigh?
Yeah, so it was like a wolf-like mammal.
Okay.
Wolf-like skull fragments, but it had nothing to do with being any kind of a whale creature, because that study that they published in the journal Nature said that it was a runner, moving with only their digits touching the ground. So this thing is so far away from being a whale or even swimming around in the water, because it ran so fast only its fingers touched the ground.
I don't, Dan, do you have
what
any?
in the world could that do?
I know. Do you have any kind of theory? Any kind of theory? Why does Richard believe this and teach this?
You know, I think I believe firmly in Romans 1 and 2 Peter 3 that talk about people are willingly ignorant.
Right.
It also, the 2 Peter 3 also prophesies, it says in the end days, people are going to come denying a spontaneous creator and creation and a cataclysmic flood. And that's exactly what we're seeing. There's a spiritual phenomenon to this that's much deeper than a secular argument. So he's blind like any other evolutionist is blind, and it's sad. And I think prayer can open doors and open eyes, but for right now, Mr. Dawkins is blind. He's not seeing correctly.
All right, let me play some more here.
Rhodocetus, see that the nostril has moved backwards.
Okay, he's saying Rhodocetus, the nostrils have moved backwards. First of all, does any animal in the world have the ability to move his nostrils?
Yeah, the nostril stories is a very fascinating one, Kent. In fact, on one of these icons, they didn't even find the nostril, and they just recently came out and admitted that with an interview that Carl Werner did. He had some of these folks in a room and said, well, show me the nostrils. And they said, well, actually, we didn't find them. We found the lower jaw and how far it extended out. They have the upper part of the upper jaw, but not the extension where the nose would be. So they really have no idea.
So they find, hang on, I want to make sure people understand this. They find the lower jaw, and you can't tell where the nostrils are from that. But again, you're still breathing into the nostrils and into the throat, which goes to you have to have an epiglottis. The trachea has to be connected. The whales are totally different than that. So they didn't find any nostrils at all, but he's claiming the whale nostrils are moving backwards. So would you say this would be his lack of understanding of the truth? Is he deliberately lying? Has he fallen for the fraud, or why does he do this?
I think it's just like going in my backyard and saying, well, look, I found a golf ball, a baseball, and a volleyball in the dirt. And look, it proves that one evolved to the other. Well, no, it doesn't. It just proved that you found 3 different sized balls. That's all. So I think it even gets worse when you go to Rhodocetus, which is his next icon there, and I can't hear the video too well, but that's the next one he's getting to. And they based that entire discussion on 3 fossils that were found in the early 90s, again in Pakistan. I guess Pakistan is a really whale-rich area for fossils here. But the problem here is Gingrich is the same guy who found Pakistan and became famous for it. He actually redacted his position again on Rhodocetus. Here he finds these 3 different fossils. The books go crazy. The textbooks, the proceedings of the National Academy of Science, they all start publishing Rhodocetus with a fluked tail. Then Carl Werner interviews Gingrich. They have this on video. You can go to YouTube and watch it. And he asks them, well, where'd you get the fluked tail? Because I was studying the fossil right here you have in front of me, and I noticed it doesn't have a fluked tail. In fact, you don't even have where the fluked tail would attach to a ball vertebrate. So what gives there? So we asked Gingrich this question, and he says, quote, he says, well, I told you we don't have the tail in Rhodocetus, so we don't know for sure whether it had a ball vertebrae indicating a fluke or not. So I speculated it might have had a fluke. So here again, we have books and museums running crazy putting flukes on Rhodocetus, and Gingrich himself says, I speculated, and we don't even have a ball vertebrae indicating that it had a fluke. So poof, there vanishes its fluked tail, and it gets even worse when he's asked again on video. You can go to YouTube and watch this with Dr. Carl Werner, the guy who wrote the Evolution Grand Experiment book. He corners Gingrich again about the flippers and said, well, look, I understand you've got Rhodocetus here, you've got its flippers, tell me how you got to that. And then, well, Gingrich says, well, since the original discovery, we've found more forelimbs, the hands and the front arms of Rhodocetus, and we understand that it doesn't have the kind of arms that can spread out like flippers on a whale. So now he's redacting the flippers and the fins that they put on museums everywhere and books everywhere with Rhodocetus swimming around. And now he says, you know what, based upon these forelimbs that we've now found subsequently, there's no way it could have had flippers or fins. They didn't have the kind of arms that could spread out and be useful like a flippers on a whale. So its fluke is gone and its fins are gone. And without a fluke and fins, you pretty much don't have a whale anymore, or even an in-between.
All right, let me play some more here.
Backwards on the skull, backwards along the snout. Now if you look at a modern whale, that's a dolphin, a modern dolphin, you see that the nostril is right up near the top of the head. That's the blowhole. The nostril has moved right backwards. Now, really surprising.
You know, we can stop it there again, Kent. The interesting thing about Durodon, you know, that we do have about 50 of those that have been uncovered in various, you know, levels of completion in the fossil record. They're simply extinct whales. There's no big deal there. Some of them are about 50 feet long. They've got nostril openings. They've got blowholes on tops of their skulls. They're just straight up whales. There's nothing about them that would look transitional. They're just an extinct version of whales. Like we have extinct apes, we have extinct mammals, we have extinct types of bears, and we have extinct types of whales. You know, Noah's flood was a catastrophic thing, and not all the animals made it through. So they're in the fossil record. We have about 50 of them. No big deal, but they're not transitions.
Well, but he's got a line between them. I mean, here it is. The Nebraska Museum has a line between them. Isn't that proof? Hang on one second. Yes, sir? I got it.
Okay, go ahead.
What?
What were the hind limbs like on that particular animal?
On the
last one, the one you're talking about.
the one they found 50 of. Did they find evidence that it had a fluke on the back, or like a tail of a whale?
Or did it have hind limbs?
Did it have hind limbs?
I'm not sure specifically about that one. It did not have hind limbs. It's very much a whale. It's got a blowhole. It's got, on the top of its head. It's just very much a whale, but not a whale that we have alive today.
As far as we know, it's an extinct whale, which is there's a lot
as far as we know.
thousands of
we
examples.
We do have 50 of them, so yeah. So there's a pretty good idea. They're about 50 feet long, some of them, and but the Durodons are just whales.
So to go
openings, blowholes right on the top of their skulls.
Right, to go from a wolf-like creature to a 50-foot long, that'd be a big wolf, wouldn't it? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Let me play some more here.
One other point on that, Kent, that's real interesting is that, do you know that Darwin himself saw a black bear swimming around and eating insects in its mouth, and so he was actually the first one to come up with the mammals turned into whale idea, and in his opinion it wasn't even just bears in general, it was specifically black bears that he thought that they came from. But when you look at the original creature that even evolutionists today say they came from, they're completely split. The California Academy of Sciences, that's responsible for putting together all the museum exhibits in San Francisco and other places today, they claim pretty emphatically that they believe the early ancestors of whales was a hyena-like creature. And then you've got Gingrich saying, no, it was an antelope, and other people saying, no, the genetics and the molecular stuff show it was a hippopotamus. But you would think if there was a clear trail of evolution that they would have that answered, but even the leading evolutionary places still can't decide on the imaginary creature that they originally came from.
Well, and I point out, I say, guys, this is obviously not science, this is imagination. So why is everybody required to pay for this to be taught for all the kids to learn? Who pays for the University of Nebraska to put these displays up here? Who paid for this anyway?
Yeah, taxpayer dollars, I bet.
Yeah, this is tax-funded religion is what it is. All right, let me go some more here, Dan.
Yeah.
Animal is the most closely related to modern whales among modern animals? And the answer, astonishingly, is the hippopotamus.
So the hippopotamus is closely related to the modern whale. What on earth, what is wrong with this guy's brain cells?
Yeah, well, broadly speaking, they just go out. The predominant opinion is that these things called ancient artiodactyls, and that's just a collective term meaning even-toed animals,
right.
and they put a lot of different mammals in that group, and it includes goats, sheep, camels, pigs, things like that, or cows or deers. But that's the idea and where it comes from. But then if you were to to really pin an evolutionist at the California Academy of Sciences, they would say, well, it's a hyena-like creature. And then Gingrich says, well, it was Pakicetus. And then 20 years later, he says, well, it's an antelope. So, again, we have the same thing, that the fear of God is the beginning of knowledge. And without that, people are going to be left to their own skepticism.
All right, 40 more seconds of Dawkins. If you can not puke, let me play it, okay?
Which is classified in the even-toed ungulates, the cloven-hoofed animals. So what we now believe is that there was an ancestor which was a cloven-hoofed animal before 55 million years ago. A little bit before that, the ancestor gave rise to other cloven-hoofed animals. And then later than that, there was a split between the lineage leading to whales and the lineage leading to modern hippopotamuses. It's molecular evidence as well as fossil evidence that shows that hippos are the most closely related modern animals.
Now hold it. He said there's molecular evidence that they're related. What they're doing, they're looking at DNA sequencing and things like that, not even realizing this is pretty obvious evidence of the same designer. Steve, you do a lot of work with computers. How many lines of code from Microsoft PowerPoint are identical to lines of code from Microsoft Word?
80%.
80%. Identical lines of code. Does that prove they all came from Morse code or that explosion in a print shop? Or no, the same guys are writing the code. It just boggles my mind, Dan, that they can believe this kind of stuff. But
Yeah.
all right, any comments?
You're exactly right.
Any comments here?
No, I think, here's one of the unique junctures where I would actually agree with Charles Darwin, who said that if my theory is true, he said, we should expect that the future is going to reveal all kinds of transitionary fossils. The ground's going to be filled with them, and every geological layer is just going to reveal it. Well, you know what? Swing and miss. It didn't happen. We've been collecting fossils for over 150 years more since he said that. And we would expect, if this story is true that Dawkins is saying here, we should have some pretty clear transitions. If you're going to go through 21 morphological changes to go from a mammal to a whale, you better have a very, very clear trail of breadcrumbs. But they don't have it. They've got inferences, cladograms, and drawings that hypothetically connect these creatures, but the evidence isn't there.
All right, 7 more seconds. Hang on here.
Animals.
Well, that was it. The Richard Dawkins Foundation, he wants us to believe. Now, I have hours and hours of stuff I could put together on... hours and hours of slides I could put together showing exactly what you talked about, that this stuff has all been disproven. There are many quotes saying it's not true, but they still teach it in the textbooks as if it's true. I was speaking at the Arkansas House Representatives Committee that was selecting textbooks, and I went through about, 15 or 20 or 30, whatever it was, lies in the textbooks. I said, you can't buy these books for Arkansas students in public school because this has been proven wrong, and this has been proven wrong, and this has been proven wrong. And the lawyer from the ACLU said, what are you going to replace this with? I said, excuse me? You're saying I can't take out lies from the textbooks because I don't have a replacement because these lies happen to support your theory? Is that what you're trying to not say? Brother, it's sad, Dan, so I appreciate your ministry. Tell us a little bit more about what you do in your ministry, and can people get you to come speak?
Absolutely.
Go ahead.
Ken, we love speaking, but one of the things that I've learned is that millennials these days are gathering their truth and their worldview mostly through social media. And if you can't bake things down to a short, compact YouTube video and get it in 90 seconds, oftentimes you're not willing to sit down and wade through a 400-page creation book. So we've really been putting out a lot of our ministry tools on YouTube. For example, we just spent about 13 weeks developing a video on Noah's flood, on what happened specifically on the North American continent just with Noah's flood. Spent 13 weeks on it, released it on Friday. It's now got 40,000 views with hundreds of thousands of minutes of people that have spent watching it. So we're learning that it's a treasure trove. It's an incredibly effective way to multiply efforts by making short, impactful videos, releasing them on YouTube, and then they get referred virally from one friend to the other. So I couldn't imagine in a weekend we'd be up to 40,000 views on a flood video, but it's doing really well.
Amen. Well, I'm going to have to whack Richard Dawkins about 30 more times, I think. There's a lot of things that he teaches. This whale evolution is only one, but he says this is one of the best evidences for evolution. The whale, which is nothing but lines on paper.
And we've shown in about 10 minutes how easy it is to deconstruct his ideas. It's really it's sad. We need to pray for him, and we need to get in the way and not let these things deceive the masses like they're so currently doing.
Well, here's my final closing thoughts to Dr. Dawkins himself, and maybe you can add some comments here. I said, Dr. Dawkins, the so-called missing links in the whale evolution story that you give as the best evidence for evolution have been disproven years ago. Why are you still presenting them? Option 1, you honestly don't know that they're fraudulent. Option 2, you know but don't have a better replacement, so you hope no one will call you on it. Option 3, you're deliberately dishonest to protect your religion of evolution. I think he's a religious zealot. Option 4, you're being paid to mislead people. Can you think of another option, Dan? Why would he keep teaching this stuff?
The deceived deceive, and I don't know Richard personally, but I know a lot of people like him that are just deceived. And in fact, one of our people that agrees with biblical creation now, his name is actually Charles Charles Darwin. He's a professor over at a local college here. His real name is Charles Darwin Daly. He taught evolution for 50 years, went and heard our talks for 3 years, invited me as a guest lecturer in his class, and he went up to go see his Genesis history movie, and he came out of the movie theater looking like a ghost. And a few weeks later, he converted after being an evolution teacher for 50 years.
Wow.
So it can happen. It's a spiritual darkness that comes over people, but God bless creation ministries that are willing to get out there and take the risks and do sometimes adversarial and confrontational work to lay out the truth and let people come to the light. But I definitely think it's a spiritual issue, but you've got to stay in the fight and present many convincing proofs, and you always be prepared to give an answer in love for those who have questions. So,
Amen.
But it works. I mean, if there's a evolutionist by the name of Charles Darwin had taught evolution here for 50 years and converted in 3, it can happen.
Yay. Now, creation.com has a long article about the whale evolution fraud, and it is indeed a fraud. Now, about whatever it is. Today's